Subaru from ReZero is the perfect representation of an underpowered isekai protagonist done right. To a certain extent, the isekai genre is kind of like fast food. It's garbage with little to no substance, but everyone likes it, including myself. That's not to say that all isekai anime are bad. There's actually several good ones out there, like Slime, Mushoku Tensei, and Eminence in Shadow. But for every good isekai, there's like 20 terrible ones out there. So much so that the classic overpowered isekai protagonist has basically become a total joke, which is why you see various spin-offs of that trope, like Reincarnated as a Sword, or even worse, that vending machine one. But in a general sense, they all have the same approach. Antisocial guy gets transported to a new world where he becomes unreasonably overpowered and then accrues a harem of female characters who live to serve him. Their end goal is always to fight the Demon King. They face many strong opponents who block their path, but through the power of friendship, they overcome all odds and live to create a better world. But in this gutter of mind-numbing tropes, overstated fan service, and well, planetary cringe, there's one isekai that undeniably separates itself from the rest. And that, of course, is ReZero, the one isekai that takes the romanticized notion of the fantasy adventure and drowns it in the darkness. And because I just so happened to randomly start rewatching ReZero, I felt the need to glaze this anime and speak on why Subaru fits his role perfectly as an underpowered character done right in a fantasy universe. Subaru begins his journey with the expectations of the typical isekai illusions. He will get magic powers, become an overpowered badass, meet his female lead, and together they will take on the world, defying evil at every corner, and ultimately come out victorious. And let's just say that Subaru quickly comes to realize that this fantasy world isn't quite as fantastical as he might have predicted or imagined. He's broke, he's magicless, there's no one there to guide Subaru, and he gets in way over his head, completely disregarding his dire situation. All he's got to his name are some snacks, a cell phone, and his iconic tracksuit. Like I said before, when other isekai protags get transported to a new world, they are at least gifted with something that helps them fend for themselves, or at least a level system that allows them to move forward like a video game. This isn't the case for Subaru. This isn't the case for ReZero. Almost like it's making a point that circumstances are just as real as they are dangerous. But just as things are looking desperate, a ray of hope shines brightly, that being Amelia, with her unnerving kindness speaking to Subaru louder than anything in this dark fantasy. She's such a genuine and good-hearted person that Subaru is compelled to stand by her side, assist and protect her any way he can, which unfortunately blinds him to his environment and understanding of the world. Subaru ignorantly rejects the warnings around him. He dismisses the darkness lurking at every corner, and he therefore ultimately succumbs to his fate, experiencing one of many deaths in less than 12 hours of being isekai'd, while Amelia also falls in the process. And with his last breath, he pitifully vows to save Amelia, to preserve that one light in this endless night. Of course, unbeknownst to Subaru, he has the ability returned by death, but the true crux of many issues that Subaru will inevitably face and struggle comes from the fact that he has an inability to adapt to his environment. Again, cause I have to say this is how ReZero flips the script on the isekai genre. In several isekai, it almost seems like the main characters ease their way into their respective new worlds almost a little too well, like they face no challenges. Well, unless you're Kazuma, then all you face is the daily struggles of a useless goddess, a masochist knight with terrible aim, and Megumin who has an explosive obsession. But rarely do the standard isekai protagonists confront the elevated stakes of their fantasy. Because they are overpowered and so broken, they can usually just muscle their way through their problems and it's fine. For example, we see Naofumi in Shield Hero instantly rejected from his world. He's vilified, ostracized, he's forced to fend for himself, but because he's the Shield Hero, he actually does pretty well on his own. Sure, it wasn't easy, but the point that I'm trying to make is that whatever obstacles they may have to overcome, it's all peanuts in comparison to Subaru's struggles. Subaru doesn't have any broken abilities, well other than return by death, which rapidly becomes more of a curse than a blessing, but he's essentially a fish out of water. Or rather, you could argue that he was thrown into the deep end with sharks circling below and was expected to tread in these murky waters. But he's exceptionally optimistic, honest, and naive, projecting his own experiences on the world of ReZero, which is exactly how it should be, because this is realistically how anyone would behave under these types of conditions. Subaru was also a shut-in, so in some sense, this is like a chance at redemption, a clean slate where he can choose his own path, identity, and become the best version of himself. So Subaru starting his adventure is blinded by his preconceived notions and expectations regarding the fantasia of a magical world. He has no idea where he is, what he's supposed to do, nor does he understand the intensity of the political state mistakes that he stumbles into, and the only way he learns is through the countless mistakes and failures that consistently lead to his demise and the deaths of those around him. Subaru doesn't have any wisdom or magic to speak of. All he has is his pride, which is his own double-edged sword. He doesn't even realize that he's stuck in this death loop where events in his life revert to zero until he succumbs to his third fatality. And so he's basically stuck in the cycle of repetition, reliving events, meeting the same people who have no recollection of him, even though he has memories and knowledge and information of them, which isn't always that helpful. He's consistently facing this inescapable death loop where his fate is set in stone until he overcomes all the required events that will allow him to make it to the next checkpoint. But by the time of his third death, Subaru realizes that he does have enough information to make it in this world on his own. He can sell his cell phone, live comfortably, and it's a done deal. However, he can't ignore the people he has come to meet, and knowing the dark fate that they have in store, he's compelled to fight it. He's compelled to save them. But that comes at a cost, and life is always the price. But he vows to walk this path, sacrificing his very own sanity, which inevitably becomes a massive burden that he will eventually have to face on his own. Just in the first arc alone, Subaru dies so many times that the psychological damage is already done. The fear has already set in, and it's that fear that guides him forward. And facing death several times in the span of a 12-hour time frame, he finally finds his bearings with enough pieces in place to move on to the next save point. But it never gets easier. In fact, it's just the beginning of his continuous suffering. Because when you're in a position like Subaru, the constant death deludes your mind. Is it a dream or is it a nightmare? Is he actually living, or is he just waiting for his eventual death? But against those insurmountable odds, Subaru continues to fight for that happy ending he's chasing. His will crumbles against fear, but it doesn't shatter. It breaks down to come back twice as strong. He uses his new experiences, chance relationships, and all relevant information to secure the opportunity to defy this predestined fate. He doesn't have the power to bypass his roadblocks, to fight off the suspicion he attracts, and his one-sided attachments become nothing more than a loose string connected to his fingers. But despite everything, he accumulates meanings from every death and carries them forward to the future. And with the matching arc following the beginning of Subaru's next checkpoint, we witness firsthand the genesis of Subaru's descent into madness. The Mansion arc is where Subaru meets and formalizes himself with many of the major characters in ReZero, from Beatrice and Roswell to Ram and Rem, while building off his relationship with Emilia and Puck. And Subaru starting out isn't super aware of his impact or the intentions he's projecting that the others may misinterpret, specifically Rem. And with the external political forces regarding the country's kingless situation, it all points to Subaru being sus as hell. And at least he's aware of it, but he doesn't really act on it. Like you've Emilia here as a person in contention of becoming the next king. And Subaru, a random stranger with no identity and no understanding of this fantasy world, comes to Emilia's aid for outwardly no reason, and all he wants is to become a butler for Isekai Hisaga. Of course alarm bells are gonna start ringing. And just a tangent, I unironically think it's hilarious that Subaru consistently finds Beatrice's library and just bluntly calls her a lolly. That's just out of pocket for no reason. But no one actually trusts Subaru, except Emilia, so it doesn't take long until it all hits the fan, as it usually does in the typical ReZero fashion. Of course, Subaru's first death in the save point wasn't really his fault. He got cursed and he died in his sleep, but his reaction to this regression is painful to watch. But moving on to the next couple of deaths, everything is kind of a mindbender, because it almost feels like no matter how good Subaru tries to be, it's never enough. He's seen as a villain or a nuisance that should be removed, even though he has the best of intentions. Subaru makes these precious memories with Emilia, and in an instant, they're just gone. He has to restart and live on again, and it destroys him. But despite Subaru's immense suffering, he puts his best foot forward. He will do it all over again, attempting to retrace his steps and manifest a better fate, while simultaneously living in a past and a future that will never come true. Subaru is obsessive over Emilia, and it's because all these deaths are taking a much larger toll on his mental state than he predicted, but it's also because Emilia represents this type of hope, and it's the only thing that's really keeping him together. And with an unknown attacker after his life, and potentially those of the people Subaru has learned to care for over another cycle of deaths, he wants to move forward from this death and live strong. But when he learns that the person haunting his most recent deaths is none other than Rem, Subaru's hopes vanish. His spirit just breaks. He can't help but wonder, what did I ever do to deserve this hate? Why don't I have the power to make things right? What is the point of living just to die? And why of all people did it have to be Rem to kill me? And worst of all, he can't even tell anyone about his ability to return by death, because if he tries to expand on any of the experiences that he's had, the hand of death grabs hold of his heart and absolutely scars him. So Subaru has to bear these burdens all on his own, internalize them, and that's it. Yes, an ability that negates death is broken, and the fact that he can continue working back from previous save points to save everyone in many ways is a godsend. But the fear and psychological damage welling inside Subaru's mind from the insane amount of trauma ingrained in him is hell on earth. Subaru holds on to the memories that everyone else has forgotten, or rather that they never experienced in the first place. The kindness they showed him during those moments of suffering, and the suffering they felt when everything goes wrong. They become his source of power, and if dying is all he can do, then he will die enough times to guarantee a future where everyone is saved. He will sacrifice himself because that's his power. And so after his fourth death in this loop, his plan to finally survive the first week is to utilize all knowledge and past experiences to gain the trust of the staff and Roswald in his mansion, to prove his worth through his actions. And in this loop, he also learns what type of magic that he can use. Of course, it's nothing super broken, just supports shadow-style magic that mainly focuses on debuffs, but it's pretty suitable for our underpowered protagonist. But something that's painfully obvious is that in Subaru's pursuit to do everything right for a final time, he goes absolutely crazy. He's in such a severe manic state that he pushes to the side because all he sees is the end goal. All he's focusing on is saving everyone else. And because of that fixation, he's completely disregarded himself in the process, as the countless pain and fears he's confronted has his mind all messed up. He puts on a bright smile, but inside he's dying. He just wants to be accepted and trusted. He doesn't have the heart to bear anything more. Subaru tells himself that he should be able to laugh better, make those around him smile more. He tells himself that he can't fail, that he can't waste a single day. He's burning the candlesticks at both ends, and it's not solving a thing. He's running himself rampant, and when you put it into perspective, Subaru hasn't had a moment's peace since he transported to this world. It's just been one battle after the next. What he needs more than anything is to take a step back and let go of that burden. So when Amelia lends him her lap, giving him that opportunity to be weak and vulnerable, all that emotion he's been internalizing just spills out. In many isekai anime, all we see are these overpowered badasses that can do everything and anything. Rimuru becomes a benevolent king that can protect his kingdom. Shadow becomes the eminence in shadow and the literal object of fate itself. But Subaru can't do anything that impressive, yet he takes everything on his own, forgetting that he can try depending on those around him. Subaru shows many times that it's okay to be weak, just as it's fine to be strong. In contrast to Rem, Amelia, Roswald, and more, Subaru in combat is basically useless because he doesn't have immense power to fight off the great forces in the ReZero world. But that's why he's willing to put himself in the crosshairs of death time and time again, as it's something only he can do. If he dies enough times and suffers through enough pain all in his attempt to save Amelia, then that fills him with purpose because that's his power and driving force to defy his fate. And we see his strength personified in the fact that he's willing to go to these lengths that no one else dares to go despite his weakness, and that inspires those around him to follow his example. Rem, for example, learns to trust Subaru, lean on him as a hero, and stops blaming herself for her past indiscretions, and they are able to foster a true relationship. And after coming to this breaking point for Subaru, he's able to rise up against his destiny. He discovers the central antagonist who's been cursing him to this point, is able to earn Rem's support, and move on to the next checkpoint. Now, something that's a constant and ongoing dilemma for Subaru is his pride, which is his greatest sin. Subaru is not just prideful of himself, but for Amelia's sake as well. Through Subaru's exploits, he's built up this self-image as Amelia's knight in shining armor, without truly understanding what it exactly means in the bigger picture. Reading in between the lines of Subaru's psychology, pride has always been a source of his scars, and something he can never handle was failure. So with this context, it's understandable why Subaru wants to be someone worthy of admiration and respect, not just from Amelia, but by others around him, because he's severely lacking in the self-worth department. He so desperately wants to help Amelia and prove that he can become someone of purpose, and so he ends up disregarding her feelings in the matter completely. And when he takes that pride too far and can't turn back significant events, the last thing he ever thinks about is calling upon people for help. It's just something he refuses to do. He convinces himself that he's all alone in the matter. And that brings us into the third arc, where things honestly get pretty unbearable. First, I gotta say, every time I get to that episode where Subaru returns to the capital and makes a complete ass of himself during the royal selection, I cringe so hard. It's so difficult to watch Subaru's pride take him to this point where he discounts Emilia, embarrasses her, breaks her trust, and showcases all the worst sides of himself. The weakness that he previously took pride in, that was a source of inspiration for others, becomes nothing more than an inconvenience. And he claims it was all for Emilia's sake, but every action he takes in the royal capital is in pursuit of his ego. And as they say, pride cometh before the fall, which perfectly fits Subaru's fall from grace. But it goes so much deeper than that. Ever since Subaru transported to this fantasy world, in every forgotten timeline, Emilia saved and helped him with her kindness. She was like the glue that kept him intact after every death broke him, so of course he wants to do anything and everything to be by her side and repay those unpayable debts. But instead, the darkest aspects of his desires break through. Even if there's truth in what he claims, it's shadowed by his ugliness of the past lives that he can't explain to anyone. And with all those burdens piling up, Emilia takes the resolve to cut those ties from Subaru, which isn't super great for our boy because he sinks into despair, and then we enter the part of Subaru's underpowered adventure where he really goes crazy. Now, this arc is famous because it's where we see most of the most brutal deaths that Subaru faces in ReZero, thematically coinciding with Subaru's lowest points in the series. But sometimes the best thing you can do is listen to the request of others because they may know what's better for you than you do yourself, but Subaru's pride just won't have any of it. It's meant to showcase the two extremes of Subaru's inevitable fate in these situations and the limitations that he faces. He does everything and everyone dies. He does nothing and it's the exact same thing. In the third death loop of this arc, Subaru's driving sin is his greed. He wants everything. He wants the witch's cult to be obliterated. He wants everyone stopped without doing any of the legwork himself. And most importantly, he wants Emilia. And going down this route, he's just holding on to his anger and hatred for what he saw in those discarded timelines. Subaru is acting impulsive, reckless, and isn't thinking through like what he did in his previous arcs. It's almost like when Emilia abandoned him. And let's face it, for justified reasons, Subaru forgot how to conduct himself in this isekai world. He's underpowered in the worst of ways. His desperation reeks and he's just absolutely pathetic. He's constantly prioritizing his own wants and needs. He's blocking out everyone else, and because of his inaction, he goes through the cycle of losing everyone again. Up until the end of this loop, his greed never disappears, exemplified with his will to continue living as a crying mess while the white whale chases him, or his possessiveness to return to the mansion to save Emilia. And when he attempts to tell her about return by death, she just ends up dead in his arms. The main idea intermingled between Subaru's sufferings is intended to showcase just how his innate selfishness led him down these predestined fates of despair. Subaru's pride brought him disgrace, his sloth manifested in his incompetence, and his greed for everything made him lose everything. And these sins are all coordinated with the 3 sins Puck reveals to Subaru by his continuous transgressions. Subaru broke his promise to Emilia without understanding why it was so important to her in the first place. Second, he ignored her wishes and returned to the mansion. And third, he let Emilia die time and time again. Now, all these sins and burdens that traumatize Subaru, they are representations of not only his failures, but the parts of himself that he hates the most. And the way he behaves during this arc is how Subaru truly sees himself. In Season 1, we don't know the past Subaru, only the one that gets isekai'd, the person who saw this world as a chance for a new slate, to redefine himself from his previous misgivings, but from his perspective, it all ends up getting reverted to zero. He has no strength, but he wants it all. He has no knowledge, and all he does is dream. There's nothing he can do, but he struggles in vain anyways. Each of these are the qualities that Subaru actually sees in himself, which is why he detests his very existence. All Subaru sees in his reflection is a curse that makes everyone else worse off, an incompetent fraud full of pride. Subaru convinces himself that he hasn't changed at all, that despite how much he's done, it's all been for nothing. But that isn't true, because these negative aspects we've seen of Subaru are only one side of him, and through his journey, we see the contradictions of his self-image from the ways that others see him. A Subaru who didn't squander his time but actually refused to waste a second and took action. A Subaru who acted on behalf of Emilia for her sake and her sake alone, standing at the gates of hell to fight no matter what it takes. Because just as Subaru has this deplorable image of himself, there's other people out there who cherish those aspects about him. All he ever had to do was lean on the people who care for him. Subaru kept believing that he's all alone with this trauma, but whenever he dies, Rem and others will always be there, as reminders of his purpose and the ending he desires. They will be there to support Subaru's weaknesses, seeing his imperfections as parts of himself that make him remarkable. It's such a powerful message, the strongest thing that that anyone can do is ask for help and depend on people you care about. You're only truly alone if you believe it, but there's always someone out there in reach. You just gotta extend your hand. Even if Subaru is powerless and he can't continue forward, he can trust in others to help carry those burdens. And if he can't forgive himself, if he's empty and he has nothing, then why not just start from there? Start from zero and build up to the future you want, adding everything up and doing the math. And it makes it so much more impactful because we witness Subaru's despair in all these previous timelines struggle and cling on to life. So when he finally makes it right, it's so much more gratifying to see his success after all the suffering. What makes Subaru so fascinating as an underpowered character done right is the fact that most of his losses in ReZero stem from the mental battles in contrast to the physical. When his mind is strong, then even though he doesn't have the physical capacity to win his battles, his will to never give up and persevere through adversity shines like gold. And when people see him, the weakest character giving his all and refusing to waver in the face of death, it motivates them to struggle forward as well. And that mindset is more powerful than any magic, physical superiority, or any return by death ability, and it's something we can all apply to our own very lives.